We're just going to get started for today. Welcome, everyone. We are back for another episode of Leadership COGS. I'm excited to see everyone. My name is Farnia Fernell. I see we have a few new people joining us today. I'm excited because together we're here to deliver a refreshing and insightful just-in-time workday session meant to set you up for greater productivity. For those of you joining for the first time, our series is called Leadership COGS, and today our topic is bias, brains, and business. So it's a rich topic, and I look forward to digging in. But before I do, let me just tell you a little bit about me. So if you don't know me, I am a former Fortune 100 global leader in financial services and consulting. And many years ago, I realized there was a gap in my understanding. I'm a first gen systems engineer turned executive coach. And to get there, what I realized was that there was this gap. And it was my difference in culture that was oftentimes keeping me from progressing in certain ways, the way that a lot of high performing people do. So 12 years ago, I used what I knew and learned and got coached, and I started the Lenserf Group. And since that time, I've worked with countless leaders across 44 countries, and that has been quite exciting. That has also been the reason why I launched COGS. So what is COGS? COGS is the four pillars of progressive performance. After all this time working with leaders and teams, I noticed that there was a trend. There was a trend that was evident with the highest performers in what kept them moving forward. And some of those elements included these four pillars that I like to call COGS. The C is for celebrating consistency. The O is for the ownership required to really take charge and recognize that there's something that you can take action for or towards. The G is for growing out of the glue that oftentimes keeps us stuck. You know, when you feel like you can't move or you don't have a solution and you might be stewing in that for some time. And the S is the stamina to stretch into whatever's next. It takes courage, it takes stamina, it takes effort into stretching into whatever might be next, in spite of whatever discomfort you might feel. So I'd love to just pause for a second and share this story with you. So today is actually on August 18th, 1920. The 19th Amendment in the US gave women the right to vote. And when that happened, you know, to think that women were not allowed to vote at one time kind of feels odd even saying that today. Um, that it even took till the 1970s for the Equal Credit Opportunity Act for women to independently get access to loan products. And then in 1988, for women to actually get the opportunity to own their own businesses. And all of this, I'm saying this and it sounds absurd. But I'm raising this point as we talk about bias brains in business today, because this ties directly back to our topic. In COGS today, we're recognizing how far bias has evolved over more than 105 years just here in the US. What we also recognize that progress is possible when we challenge bias. If bias shaped history this powerfully, we get to investigate how bias might still be shaping the way we hire, the way we promote, and the way we strategize in business. And feel free to drop in the chat if you might have ever seen bias at play at work. As a trained engineer who started my career in a male-dominated telecommunications and technology environment, I was certainly able to see this firsthand. From hiring decisions based on a woman's perceived marital status to compensation decisions that were based on race or country of origin to promotion decisions that were based on candidates' perceived age. So you didn't know how old she or he was. So let's go ahead and hire because they may not be dealing with this or that. I saw a lot of it. And at times, as an early manager, it was difficult to even identify that those factors were, in fact, at play. And to be honest, it was even difficult, even more difficult to escalate and to remediate because I didn't feel like I had the tools or the power. So I just wonder if any of you might have felt that way, because that's our discussion. Today we're talking about the O, which is ownership as a symptom, or S, which is that stretch that some leaders or managers might feel when they're challenged, or they might have to face their own stances about bias. So let's talk about bias. What is bias? Unconscious bias refers to the automatic, often unintentional judgments or assumptions that we make about people or groups. And a lot of times we're not even aware of it. There are three types of bias that I'll talk about today. One is affinity bias. And in affinity bias, there's a tendency to favor individuals who share similar backgrounds or attributes that you do. So you might have gone into a room or like hang out with friends and you have similar interests. So your friends indirectly are kind of like you because they do a lot of the same things. They might go a lot of the same places. And what tends to happen is the same thing goes into the workplace, where if you look at your department or you look at your organization and other people look or think just like you see these carbon copies of education. Everyone's gone to the same school, or hobbies. Everyone goes the same place on the weekends. Of race, everyone looks the same, or gender. Chances are your team or your organization might be subject to affinity bias. There's confirmation bias, and that's the tendency to interpret any new evidence as confirmation of what you already know, or what you already think you know, what you already believe. You might even actively look for information that confirms your belief. So there's evidence, meaning this is likely the truth. There's your belief, and what you continue to look for is the evidence that you believe. And you leave all of the other evidence out of the equation. So you might recall, this is how our brains work. You might even be recalling or remembering information more easily if it supports your beliefs. So you tend to remember things that support your beliefs and you forget all the other stuff, like it doesn't count. Your brain automatically does that waiting for you. That's confirmation bias. When you're faced with ambiguity, you interpret the data in a way that supports your beliefs. And I wonder, just to ask you, where might that be harmful? Where might confirmation bias be harmful? Think about if you're asking your team for innovative ideas. And there's another effect. It's actually part of confirmation bias. It's called the primacy effect, which is a type of confirmation bias that causes you to give more weight to information that comes first. So if you ask your team, "Hey, can you guys just like give me a couple ideas? Like we're about to do something. I'd love to get a couple ideas back." The first one to respond back, that first idea typically gets weighted as the correct idea, and everything that comes after it is compared. Oh, no, that one's missing this, or this one's missing, or that one has way too much. This one's much better. It's called the primacy effect. And I wonder for you all who've joined today, what do you already believe about your team members or even your organization? And just so you acknowledge that, what do you already believe about your team members or your organization? And what insights have allowed you to confirm those beliefs? When I ask that, I'm asking about all that evidence that you receive probably daily. What insights have allowed you to confirm your beliefs, and what insights are you not paying attention to? The last kind of bias that we're going to talk about here, I also saw a note in the chat says there can also be bias based on whether you're working remotely or in person. Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, oh, everyone that works at home, they're louses. They just don't want to come to work. And just thinking that, you look for evidence like, oh, I saw them go offline on Teams, or they never respond to emails within an hour. They don't respond immediately. They take time, so they must not be at their computers. There are all kinds of assumptions that come with that. Those are biases, and we may likely treat people in that way. This last bias we're going to talk about is the halo or horn effect. They're opposites of one another. So what this means is that the halo is a cognitive bias where a person or a positive impression in one area, a person who makes a positive impression. So you see something positive, like, oh, that's great. In one area, it influences the overall perception of that person. And the horn effect does exactly the opposite. So if you have a negative impression about a person or people, then however you feel, that sentiment carries over to the overall impression you have about that person or those people. So I'll give you an example. If you're hiring someone and they show up well dressed and they speak with poise and they're friendly, you're likely to feel that they may be a better candidate than someone who may not be dressed as well. So that's just looking at their clothing, their choice in clothing. Sometimes that means looking at their hair color, their eye color, their skin color, lots of other things. And even if a second candidate has more relevant experience, but they don't show up as polished, you may naturally assume that that first person who, dotted those marks, that that person is more qualified. Many people also call this the beauty bias. There's lots of research that talks about physical appearance and the associated effect with ability to performance in the workplace. So I wonder, where might you have seen this at play in your workplace, if at all? And if you have seen it, where did you contribute to it? So you don't have to put that in the chat, but I'd certainly invite you to consider, where might you have contributed to any of these biases in the past? Our session today is really meant just to dig deeper, to uncover a couple layers in ourselves. So what could the business impact be? Let's face it, there's growing pressure everywhere to decide on lots of things and interpret data as quickly as possible. But as we're doing that and speeding up our ability to make decisions, there are some things that we need to watch out for, especially if you're making decisions very quickly. Notice if your decisions are made quickly because you're in this hiring situation. I will just keep on deferring to the hiring situation because this comes up often. And notice if you defer to what a successful candidate looked like in the past. I've done work with folks in search firms a lot, and sometimes you hear that kind of conversation, like, this SC or this successful candidate looks like this SC, so they might be a good mix for us to present to a client as the right candidate. Just notice what might happen there, because if a successful candidate from the past simply looks like a successful candidate, they're automatically assume that the other attributes are going to be the same too. What can happen here is, what oftentimes does happen, is the underrepresentation of women and minorities in leadership is easily traced back to those simple, fast decisions because there's pressure to present prospective candidates. There are countless examples of resume studies and other things like that that show identical resumes with a male versus female name or another name that doesn't roll quite as easily off of the tongue. And oftentimes those names don't get the callbacks, yet the resume is identical. We know that this can happen. So making a decision too quickly can hurt you. Deciding on something because of how it looked in the past, that can hurt you. And then making decisions because it doesn't sound like what you're used to, that can also hurt you. Lastly, I'll talk about strategy. So when you listen or read the newspaper in the morning and see how the markets or the industry is performing, chances are you're paying attention to some stuff. But I ask you to start paying attention to the assumptions as you're listening to those messages, as you're reading those messages, because you're likely carrying assumptions into that reading. And in some instances, you might be misreading what you see. And that can certainly affect you. You might be missing opportunities or you might be reinforcing groupthink. I like to think about this. This happened a long time ago, but Netflix is still here now. So there's an incredible example of bias in business in the story of Blockbuster. If you've ever heard of Blockbuster, I was one of a lot of people who used to go to the local store, the local Blockbuster, to rent movies and to rent videos and to rent games. And then Netflix came along and they had this mail-in business model. They then extended it to a streaming business model. And when that was happening, Blockbuster was kind of like, oh, this is never going to work. You're relying on the mail to get your next video. So that means on Friday night, when you're with your family, you're going to wait until 2 or 3 days for a new video to come in the mail. That's never going to work. Blockbuster dismissed Netflix and said that people loved going into the store and feeling that video in their hand so they could run home to their families and watch the videos. They ignored that there was new and compelling data that said that people prefer to be at choice and the price point was right. They liked streaming services and they liked having alternate ways to get their videos. The market was changing, yet Blockbuster lost out because they were relying on what they already believed. Like, oh my gosh, people love coming into our stores. They buy candy, they get popcorn. It's a great experience. They save money, they don't have to go to the movies. This is great. But it didn't work, and Blockbuster's not around anymore. So I'll ask you, where might bias be affecting your ability to meet or even exceed your client preferences? Think about it. So let's talk about tools. As we wrap up for today, let's talk about some tools that can help as you start to navigate bias. I saw in the chat, interesting story. Yeah, that market shift, huge market shift with Blockbuster and Netflix and every other streaming service is still around. So I'll offer these three thoughts. I can see that those who lead with data, like, those in the STEM fields might prefer these first two options that I'm going to talk about. I actually said that as a joke. You guys don't know that that's a joke, but wanted to introduce that as kind of a joke to demonstrate how casually biased statements might actually be prefaced. You might be in a new meeting and someone says, "Oh, those who like this are probably going to like what I'm saying." That's usually a biased statement. It's an indication that someone is making an assumption, a broad assumption about people. So I just did that to kind of joke, and I don't know if everyone caught it, but um, what can you do about bias? What are three tools? One is just structure your decision making. I love to talk about goal setting, and this is no different. Have clear criteria for what good looks like. If you're not great at goal setting, that is perfectly fine. But somewhere in your life, you might have been subject to scoring on a test or in a game, and this is exactly the same. You have the opportunity to team source or crowdsource, work with your team to come up with important attributes for a new team member that might be coming in. And you get to assign scoring to those attributes. So it feels subjective. There's a subjective inputs, but it feels objective because you're looking at them in aggregate. You can use that criteria to anchor your decisions and then fill in your notes for why. When you meet a new candidate, or you're doing a new thing, fill in your notes for why. What is the concrete evidence of that criteria that you all agreed to? A scoring matrix, it takes minutes to create and can totally help you to turn subjectivity and take subjectivity and bias out of your hiring decisions and other important decisions. Next, you can also conduct regular audits. So if you're capturing the right data, data can be manipulated, but data usually doesn't lie. Review your hiring pipelines, your promotion rates, your pay equity and turnover. You can review lots of criteria and look for gaps between what you say is a value and the actual numbers. Elevate your audits from simply being a compliance measure, like, oh, we have to do this, we have to see, or like, how we tracking with DEI? Nobody likes the term. Elevate your audits from compliance to diagnostic tool for leadership. It increases accountability and it stresses continuous improvement. And then lastly, I'll talk about bias interrupters. This is actually my favorite, and it requires the least external work. Just take a breath and pause to reset yourself before making any decisions. It only takes 10 seconds to 2 minutes to do this. Take a breath, release whatever stress you might be experiencing in any moment, refocus, get yourself present, get out of your head, get out of your feelings, and get into the moment and what is available to you in the moment. Use empathy, use curiosity, use future casting to make an informed decision. So, as we wrap up for today, I'm so glad you're here with us today. Just as people had to actively challenge bias in law 105 years ago to grant women the right to vote, leaders today have to actively challenge bias in business. And I would love to challenge you with this. What's one decision, just one, this week, where you're going to sit down, check your assumptions, or even use data to sharpen your fairness and sharpen your clarity? That's the challenge. Remember, leadership COGS, specifically ownership and stretching into your next, requires you to take micro action to get to the macro shifts and outcomes that you actually want. So I thank you for joining us today. I'll be back in 2 weeks to talk about budget beyond headcount. If you have any questions or you want to connect, feel free to scan this QR code. As always, take care and be well.